Hello and welcome to the Introduction to the Time Phase Force Deployment Data TPFD lesson. This is basically a TPFD 101. It's for basic users that need that understanding so they're able to actually do their job and read, understand, and explain a TPFD. Today's objective is for you to comprehend the purpose and the components of a TPFD. We'll do that by looking at the definition. You have to understand what it is and know what it is before you can explain it. We'll look at the purpose of a TPFD, why we have it, why it's necessary for our operations and our daily operations. We'll look at the components. We'll start off with the basic components, and then we'll move into the major components listed in AFI 10401. After that, we'll look at the classification. How do we actually carry a TPFD from point A to point B throughout the base or to another location? We'll look at how you store a TPFD at the end of the day. And then we'll look at where that information comes from. Finally, we'll complete a TPFD activity. So let's begin. What's on the screen is the definition of a TPFD. But you can basically think of it as data that resides in JOPs or DCAPs. It's electronic, it's a database, and it's used throughout our daily operations to coordinate movement of forces into their operational locations. So we're talking about getting Airman Snuffy from point A to point B and then home again. If we look at it in a contingency standpoint, it contains all of the detailed requirements and capabilities that assist our Air Force and our joint planners to start that planning process. Crisis action side, we look at the time phasing of our forces into specific destinations. But why do we have it? Well, just like I said previously, it does enable our operational capability assessments. It allows the joint planners to actually start planning in an effort to project how our execution of our plan, our operations plan, is going to be accomplished. With that, it encompasses the timing. How are we getting to certain locations? It encompasses the sourcing. Who's going to fill those capabilities? If we look at the crisis action side, the now, it does the verification and validations. Before we can move anywhere, our supporting command has to verify that those forces are available. As such, the supported, who we are supporting, has to validate that requirement is valid before we can move it. And then in the contingency side again, it does initiate our joint deployment process. It allows our joint staff to make the decisions appropriate to plan and to approve these plans. So let's begin with the basic components. The UTC. It's a capability focused on the accomplishment of a specific mission. It can consist of personnel, equipment, or it can consist of a mix of both. Think about you as the IDO, the Logistics Readiness Officer. Your UTC is 9LRCG. Next, there is the unit line number, or the ULN. All the ULN is basically a sequence number. It's a record number of the TPFD. If you think about it like in Access, you have the key column. All it does is annotate that specific line. It lets you focus on a specific line, search a specific line, and you can find out anything about that record. It's a record identifier. Then we move to the C day. This is basically the unnamed day on which any deployment operation commences. Think of it as the movement day, when we have to be at certain locations. Next, we have the force modules. If you think about opening a base and all the capabilities, all the UTCs, all the functions that are needed to open a base, if you're going to an austere location, we could go around the classroom, we could go around and ask everybody everything that they needed to open a base. And we could come up with 30, 40, 50, maybe even 60 different capabilities. But after we discussed those, and I went to one student and asked you to name everything that we just talked about, it would be very difficult. That's where our force modules come in. They're modules that have all of these capabilities already loaded, and all the planner has to do is select that force module, the open the base force module, and it has everything needed, and they put that into the TPFD. Let's move on. Let's look at the dates. These are very important to you. The ready to load date, the RLD. All of these dates are relative to C-Day, so we'll just omit that in our discussion. But this is when the RLD is when the forces need to be ready to go from their origin, from their home station. They have to be ready to go from their origin on the RLD. The available to load date, the ALD, that's when we talk about the port of embarkation. That's when they have to be at that POE, your forces and equipment, to get on the strategic airlift or the movement to get to the final destination. The earliest and latest arrival date, or we call that the EAD, LAD window, that's when our port operations or our functions at the port of debarkation, that's the range or window that they have said that they are able to support unloading of whatever type of movement you're coming in on. It's normally a 3 to 5 day window. And again, it's when the port has said that they can support this operation. Our required delivery date, or the RDD, just what it says. It's when our forces are required to be in the local area or in their final destination. Now let's look at the major components of a TPFD listed in 10401. We'll begin with the force description data. What is force description data? Well, it's anything that identifies that line, that capability. If you look at the first line, UTC 3FBAL, that's identified as a 12-ship F-22 Alpha lead package. Tells what that capability is. You can look through the rest of that information there. 7 Echo 1 Alpha Mike is a Mobility C2 Open the Base assessment team. This tells what that force description is, what that capability is. Now let's look at the unit-specific data. When you think of unit-specific data, think of anything that identifies that unit that is filling that specific line, that specific ULN. Very easy. Unit name, unit identification code. Very simple. Moving on to what I like to call the fun stuff. This is the force movement characteristics. This is actually what is moving. If you look across the top, it says bulk, over, out, and total short tons. Where there's bulk short tons, those tons, that equipment that fits within the confines of a aircraft 463L pallet, 88 by 108 by 96, the stuff or the cargo that is listed there fits within those dimensions. Oversized short tons, simply anything that exceeds the dimensions of a 463L pallet in any way, shape, or form. If it's longer, taller, wider than 88 by 108 by 96, it is considered an oversized short ton. Outsized short tons are those pieces of equipment that require a C-5 aircraft or a C-17 aircraft to move. They won't fit on a smaller aircraft like a C-135 or a KC-135, KC-10, or a 130. The dimensions are just too big. You total all that up and you get the total number of short tons. Looking at the authorized persons or the PACs, the authorized persons are the total number of people on or listed in that UTC, in that capability. The PACs are the number of people that need Transcom to move them. That top line, just like we saw over there, was a 12-ship F-22 package. My math is correct. 40 minus 12 is 28. We have 12 aircraft. We need 12 people flying those aircraft wherever they're going. And then we need the remaining people to be transported. Routing and time phasing. How are we going to get there? Well, this is basically tells you that information. We start at the RLD. Each one of these dates is associated with a location. The RLD is associated with the origin, which in this case it is McGuire Air Force Base. The individuals that are leaving, or the capability that's leaving McGuire Air Force Base, has to be ready to go, ready to load at the origin on C2. So what this is basically saying is at C day plus 2, that line of entry at McGuire needs to be ready to go. The ALD references or is associated with the port of embarkation, which in this case is the same, McGuire Air Force Base. We can find out if it's the same if we research the port of embarkation mode and source code, the POE MS code. In this case, XG means that the origin and POE are the same. That's why if you look at the dates, the RLD and the ALD on the top line are the same, C2. The window that I talked about, the EAD LAD window, is C3 to C5. That's in New Jerseyka. Again, fake tip fid because they're classified. We're getting to New Jerseyka, which is our port of debarkation, using the mode and source code AK, which in this case means strategic aircraft provided by Transcom. And then we must be at our destination at C6, which is also in New Jerseyka. And you can look at that and you can verify that by looking at the destination mode and source code, which is XX, which in this case means the POD and the destination name are the same. Very simple. And again, when you're pulling a tip fid, when you're putting the columns where you want them, move these columns around. If you feel more comfortable using the RLD or putting that date right beside the origin, that's perfectly fine. This is how I like to read a tip fid. For those of you that like to use pictures versus just data, this kind of gives the exact same thing that we just talked about. The RLD at the origin, the ALD at the point of embarkation, and the EAD LAD window is at the port of debarkation, or the POD, and the RDD is at the destination. But then we look and we have ILOC, an intermediate location. This is basically training. We can put that at any place. We can put it between the RLD and ALD. That's when they have to do support training before they deploy. Or we can put it from the EAD LAD window in between that and the RDD. When they get into the theater of operations, they need to do some type of training. They need to do something that combine with their units to get ready to go. The only place it can't be is between the ALD and the EAD, because that's when you're actually flying over the ocean into the AOR. So now let's talk about classification. Right now in the Air Force, this is a big concern. So let's begin with our OPSEC and COMSEC requirements. If I ask you how you transported a tip fid from point A to point B on a base, I could probably get as many answers that are different as for as many students as there are in the class. So let's discuss that. First thing you want to do is you want to make sure that the tip fid, think about it as if you have printed it out, that piece of paper, you want to mark it at the top and bottom with the highest classification that's on it. Normally tip fids are secret. You also want to flip it onto the back side, and you want to mark that as well, top and bottom, with a stamp. Once you've done that, the red secret cover sheet, you want to put that on top of it. Then you want to place it inside an envelope. A manila envelope is just fine. Seal that, mark that, stamp it with the secret stamp, top and bottom, front and back. Once you have that accomplished, put it in either a briefcase, locked briefcase, or put it in another manila envelope and seal that with no markings. That's how you properly transport a tip fid. Now, if we transport it off base, we'll need to get the authorization letter so we can put that on top of the outside of the package so that it's not opened and it's not reviewed. But what about storing a tip fid at the end of the day? You're ready to go home, you need to put stuff away. Where do you store it? Well, we store it in a GSA approved safe. You may ask yourself, why a GSA approved safe? Well, the General Services Administration has contracted out with safe companies, and they have to provide enough security for our classification that's listed. They have actually spent the time with the naval security and said a safe must be able to withstand this amount of time before it's able to be broke into to be classified as either secret, confidential, or top secret. GSA safes are approved at that level. They have taken the time to actually run these tests. So, moving on to what elements are classified. Well, this information should be covered in the TPFD LOI, or the letter of instruction. It should give you every classification guidance that you need. It should give you down to the very specifics. However, most of them are very vague. There's actually very few TPFD LOIs that have specific classification guidance. That's why Headquarters Air Force A5XW, or the War Dogs, they have actually sent out information, classified guidance information to the Air Force, telling them what data elements are classified. Right now, we don't like that because that pretty much ties our hands in our operations. Everything has to be worked in a secure environment. So what do? If you don't know and you don't have that guidance with you, treat it as classified. It's better safe than sorry. We would rather treat our information as classified instead of having it get into the bad guy's hands. So now let's summarize. We looked at the definition of a TPFD. It is the electronic portion of the Jobson DCAPES database. We looked at the purpose, the who, what, when, where, and how. We took a look at the basic components, those specific areas that you must know before you can actually read a TPFD and then be able to explain it to someone else. Then we moved into the major components of the TPFD that are listed in 10401. We looked at security classification guidelines. How do we carry a TPFD from point A to point B? How do we package that? Then how do we store that TPFD at the end of the day? And then we saw where that information comes from. So now let's do our TPFD activity. Click on the Activity tab at the top of the page, and it should bring up everything you need to know to complete this activity. Once done, your scores will be emailed to you the next duty day.